Imagine a fractured kingdom, where feudal lords fought for power and the title of king was little more than symbolic. It was in this chaotic landscape that a family destined to change the course of history emerged, the Capetians. How did they manage to unify France and transform a weak monarchy into one of Europe's most powerful empires? The answer lies in a series of brilliant strategies, bold reforms, and, of course, exceptional political intelligence. We find ourselves at the end of the 10th century in a Europe marked by Viking invasions, internal wars, and a feudal system that divided power among countless lords. In this context, the French monarchy was little more than an empty title, with the king holding minimal authority over his vassals. But everything changed with the rise of Hugh Capet, the first king of the Capetian Dynasty. Beginning with him, the Capetians initiated a slow yet relentless process of power centralization, transforming France into a unified and powerful nation. Their story isn't just about conquests and battles, it's about patience, vision, and the art of playing the long game in medieval politics. While other royal houses rose and fell around them, the Capetians built something remarkable, a dynasty that would shape European history for over 8 centuries. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we explore how a single family's ambition forever changed the face of Europe and created the foundations of modern France. It all began in 987 when Hugh Capet was crowned King of France. But his coronation was far from a triumphant affair. It was a shrewd political maneuver. The nobles of the realm chose Hugh precisely because he seemed less threatening than other contenders for the throne. They believed they could easily control this minor nobleman whose direct territory barely extended beyond Paris. Little did they know that Hugh had a masterful plan already forming in his mind to consolidate royal power and ensure his family would remain on the throne for generations to come. His first great strategy, making the monarchy hereditary, a move that would change the political landscape forever. Before Hugh's time, the French throne wasn't automatically passed from father to son. Kings were elected by powerful nobles, creating constant instability and power struggles. Hugh recognized this weakness and took a revolutionary step. While still alive and healthy, he had his own son Robert crowned as co-king. This simple yet brilliant act established a precedent that would secure Capetian rule for centuries. Did you know the Capetians ruled France for more than 800 years? Yes, from 987 until 1792, when the French Revolution finally toppled the monarchy. This makes them one of the longest-lasting dynasties in world history. For perspective, that's longer than the entire history of the United States of America, the Roman Empire in the West, and the British Empire combined. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is how unlikely it seemed at the start. When Hugh took the throne, he controlled less land than many of his own vassals. The Dukes of Normandy and Aquitaine held far more territory and resources. Yet through patience and political genius, Hugh laid the groundwork for a dynasty that would eventually control not just France, but influence kingdoms across Europe and beyond. In those early days, Hugh's crown was little more than a gilded circlet with limited power behind it. But what he lacked in military might, he made up for with vision, understanding that true power would come not through immediate conquest, but through the steady building of institutions that would last for generations. The Capetians were absolute masters of the long game. While other dynasties fought bloody civil wars over succession, the Capetians implemented a brilliant strategy that would secure their rule for centuries. They ensured that each king, before drawing his last breath, had already crowned his successor, usually his eldest son. This simple yet revolutionary practice prevented throne disputes and created an unprecedented sense of stability in medieval Europe. Imagine the medieval world, a time when a king's death typically meant chaos, with rival claimants raising armies and plunging the kingdom into war. The Capetians sidestepped this destructive cycle entirely. By the time a Capetian king was laid to rest, his heir had already been wearing the crown, sometimes for years. The message was clear. The transition of power was not up for debate. This strategy paid dividends during moments that would have destroyed other dynasties. When Louis VI fell gravely ill in 1137, his son had already been crowned as co-king. Though Louis recovered, this foresight meant that when he did eventually die, his succession was smooth and uncontested. For nearly 300 years, from Hugh Capet to Philip IV, the Capetian succession passed directly from father to son without interruption, a feat unmatched in medieval European history. But the Capetians weren't content to simply maintain their rule. They systematically expanded it. When Hugh Capet took the throne, he controlled little more than Paris and the surrounding Île-de-France region. Generation by generation, the Capetians expanded their territories through three primary methods: strategic marriages, careful alliances, and, when necessary, calculated warfare. Marriage was perhaps their most powerful tool. The Capetians transformed wedding ceremonies into geopolitical masterstrokes. When Philip II married Isabella of Hainault, he gained claim to the rich county of Artois. These marriages weren't just about acquiring land. They were about weaving the Capetian bloodline into the fabric of Europe's noble houses. They also excelled at forming alliances, often positioning themselves as mediators between warring factions. The Capetians would back one side, then shrewdly switch their support when it benefited them. They played neighboring powers against each other while gradually strengthening their own position. And when diplomacy failed, the Capetians weren't afraid to wage war, but always with clear objectives and strategic patience. They fought when victory was likely and peace was guaranteed to be profitable. Their military campaigns weren't about glory or conquest for its own sake. They were calculated moves in a generations-long strategy to build a unified France. This remarkable blend of succession stability, marriage diplomacy, alliance building, and strategic warfare allowed the Capetians to transform their modest kingdom into the dominant power in Western Europe. They didn't just rule France, they methodically created it, piece by piece, generation by generation. One of the Capetians' greatest legacies was their creation of an efficient bureaucracy, perhaps the first truly modern governmental system in medieval Europe. Before their innovations, kings relied on local nobles to govern, collect taxes, and administer justice. This meant power remained fragmented, with local lords often acting more like independent rulers than royal subjects. The Capetians changed everything by appointing royal officials known as bailis to administer the provinces in the king's name. These weren't hereditary positions passed down through noble families. They were skilled administrators who served at the pleasure of the crown. The genius of this system was that these men owed their loyalty directly to the king, not to local lords or their own family interests. They could be promoted for good service or dismissed for corruption, creating accountability that was revolutionary for its time. Philip Augustus, who ruled from 1180 to 1223, perfected this system. He divided his growing kingdom into administrative districts, each overseen by a bailli who was required to report regularly to Paris. These officials collected taxes, administered justice, and represented royal authority in the provinces. To prevent them from developing local loyalties, Philip would regularly rotate them between different regions. But the Capetians didn't stop there. They created the first centralized financial system in medieval France. Under King Louis IX, also known as Saint Louis, royal accountants began keeping meticulous records of all income and expenditures. These financial archives, some of which survive to this day, reveal a level of administrative sophistication that was centuries ahead of neighboring kingdoms. The Capetians also strengthened the economy through deliberate policies promoting trade and agriculture. They granted royal charters to emerging towns, offering protection and legal privileges that allowed merchant communities to flourish. They standardized weights and measures, built roads and bridges, and established regular markets and fairs. The famous Champagne fairs, which became Europe's premier trading events, flourished under Capetian protection. In agriculture, they incentivized the clearing of forests for farmland, introduced new farming techniques, and established royal granaries to stabilize food prices during shortages. These economic reforms didn't just make France wealthier, they created a new merchant class whose interests aligned with a strong central monarchy rather than local feudal powers. What's fascinating about these administrative reforms is how gradual and pragmatic they were. The Capetians didn't implement radical changes overnight. They built their bureaucracy piece by piece over generations, each king adding to his predecessor's work. This patience allowed their reforms to take root deeply, becoming permanent features of the French state rather than temporary measures that died with their creator. So did you know that the Capetians ruled for more than 800 years? If you're enjoying this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel for more incredible historical stories. And tell us in the comments, which Capetian strategy impressed you the most? Was it their succession planning, their marriage diplomacy, or these brilliant administrative reforms? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The Capetians were masters at using religion to enhance their power, and nowhere was this more evident than in their involvement with the Crusades. While other European rulers might have seen these holy wars simply as religious obligations or opportunities for conquest, the Capetians recognized something more valuable: a chance to transform the very nature of French kingship. When Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, the Capetian king Philip I was initially hesitant to participate. But the Capetians quickly recognized the political potential of these holy wars. By the time of the Second Crusade, in 1147, King Louis VII embraced the opportunity, personally leading French forces to the Holy Land. Though his military campaign was largely unsuccessful, his participation fundamentally changed how the French monarchy was perceived. The Crusades allowed the Capetians to position themselves as defenders of Christianity, elevating their status above that of mere feudal lords. This was brilliant political theatre. The king was no longer just first among equals in the feudal hierarchy, but God's chosen representative, fighting for Christendom itself. This religious dimension gave the monarchy a sacred character that no amount of military conquest could provide. The relationship between the Capetians and the Church reached its pinnacle during the reign of Louis IX, now known to history as Saint Louis. Louis led two crusades, one in 1248 and another in 1270. Though both expeditions ended in military failure, the first with Louis's capture and ransom, the second with his death from disease, they were tremendous political successes. Louis's piety was legendary. He was known to feed the poor with his own hands and walk barefoot through Paris carrying holy relics. He built the magnificent Sainte-Chapelle in Paris to house the crown of thorns, which he had purchased at enormous expense from the Byzantine emperor. This spectacular Gothic masterpiece wasn't just a religious monument, it was a physical manifestation of the sacred nature of French kingship. Here's a fascinating detail. Louis would often dispense justice personally, sitting beneath an oak tree at Vincennes, accessible to all his subjects. This image of the king as both sacred and accessible created a powerful new model of monarchy that his successors would build upon. After Louis's death in 1270, the Church moved with unprecedented speed to canonize him. By 1297, he was officially Saint Louis, the only French king ever to achieve sainthood. This was an extraordinary political asset for the Capetians. How could any noble challenge the authority of a dynasty that had produced an actual saint? The Capetians leveraged this religious prestige in practical ways too. They received special taxation rights from the Pope to fund crusades, money that was often diverted to other royal projects. They secured the right to appoint bishops and abbots throughout the realm, giving them control over vast church lands and resources. And they used their status as protectors of the faith to justify intervening in the affairs of neighboring Christian kingdoms. This fusion of religious and royal authority was revolutionary. Previous kings had been crowned by the church. The Capetians made themselves integral to the church. They weren't just rulers by divine right. They were active participants in the divine plan, defending Christendom and embodying Christian virtues. This transformation of kingship would influence European monarchy for centuries to come, long after the Crusades had faded into history. Over the centuries, the Capetians accomplished what seemed impossible at their dynasty's humble beginnings. They transformed France from a patchwork of disunited feudal territories into a centralized and powerful state. When Hugh Capet took the throne in 987, he could hardly travel safely through his own supposed kingdom. By the time Philip IV died in 1314, France was the richest, most powerful, and most culturally influential kingdom in Western Europe. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of centuries of patient, methodical efforts by generation after generation of Capetian rulers. Each king built upon the foundations laid by his predecessors, gradually expanding royal authority until the monarchy became the center of French political life. This patient, long-term approach is perhaps the most important lesson the Capetians left for future rulers. The Capetians established the groundwork for the absolute monarchy that would come to dominate Europe in the centuries that followed. When Louis XIV, the Sun King, famously declared, "I am the state" in the 17th century, he was expressing the culmination of processes the Capetians had set in motion hundreds of years earlier. The centralized bureaucracy, the divine right of kings, the subordination of the nobility to royal authority, all these hallmarks of absolute monarchy had their roots in Capetian innovations. Their administrative reforms proved particularly enduring. The Capetians created the first professional civil service in medieval Europe, with royal officials governing in the king's name throughout the realm. This model of centralized governance through appointed officials rather than hereditary nobles would be adopted by kingdoms across Europe and remains fundamental to modern state administration today. Here's something fascinating. The Capetians were also cultural innovators, making Paris the intellectual center of medieval Europe. The University of Paris, founded with royal support in the 12th century, attracted scholars from across the continent and helped spread Capetian influence through education. The French language itself became the international language of diplomacy and culture, a status it would maintain for centuries. The Capetians' influence extended far beyond France's borders. Through strategic marriages, Capetian princes and princesses sat on thrones from Hungary to Sicily, from Portugal to Jerusalem. When Isabella of France married Edward II of England, she brought Capetian administrative practices to the English court. When Charles of Anjou, brother of Louis IX, became King of Sicily, he implemented Capetian governance in southern Italy. Perhaps most remarkably, the Capetian legacy survived even after their direct male line ended in 1328. Their cousins, the Valois, continued their policies of centralization. Later, the Bourbon kings, also descended from the Capetians through a side branch, would perfect the absolute monarchy the Capetians had envisioned. Even after the French Revolution swept away the monarchy in 1789, many Capetian innovations, particularly their administrative structures, were preserved and expanded by Napoleon and later French republics. The map of modern Europe still bears the imprint of Capetian state-building. The centralized nation-state, with power flowing from a strong central government rather than dispersed among regional authorities, became the dominant political model across the continent. This Capetian innovation eventually replaced the looser, more feudal structures that had dominated early medieval Europe. What began as a desperate gambit by a minor noble to secure his precarious crown became one of history's most successful political projects, a dynasty that not only survived for 8 centuries, but fundamentally reshaped the nature of European governance. The Capetians didn't just rule France, they created it, transforming a geographical expression into a unified nation that would play a central role on the world stage for centuries to come. The rise of the Capetians is a remarkable story of intelligence, patience, and extraordinary vision. They demonstrated that even amid chaos and fragmentation, it's possible to build something truly lasting. Their journey began with Hugh Capet, a relatively minor nobleman who controlled little more than Paris and culminated in one of history's most powerful dynasties. A transformation that took not years, but centuries of consistent effort. What's most striking about the Capetian success isn't just what they achieved, but how they achieved it. In an era where most rulers thought only of immediate glory and conquest, the Capetians played the long game. They understood that true power isn't built through dramatic victories on the battlefield, but through the patient construction of institutions, the careful cultivation of legitimacy, and the gradual extension of authority. Perhaps the most powerful lesson the Capetians offer us today is that monumental change rarely happens overnight. Their story reminds us that great achievements often begin with small, seemingly insignificant steps. Hugh Capet's decision to crown his son during his lifetime might have seemed a minor innovation at the time, but it became the cornerstone of 8 centuries of stability. Philip Augustus's administrative reforms might have appeared as mere bureaucratic tinkering to his contemporaries, but they laid the foundation for the modern state. The Capetians also teach us about adaptability. They began as feudal lords among many, but as Europe changed around them, they evolved their approach, embracing religious authority, developing administrative systems, fostering urban growth, and patronizing education and culture. They didn't cling to outdated models, but reinvented monarchy for each new age. In our world of instant gratification and short-term thinking, the Capetian approach to governance feels almost revolutionary. They remind us that the most enduring institutions aren't built in a day, that patience can be a form of power, and that consistency over time can achieve what force cannot. What do you think we can learn from the Capetians today? Is there wisdom in their patient approach to building something lasting? Could their methods of gradual, consistent change apply to our modern challenges? Or perhaps you see parallels between their administrative innovations and today's evolving institutions. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's most remarkable dynasties, please leave a like, share this video with friends who appreciate history, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel to explore more fascinating stories from the Middle Ages. From the rise and fall of great empires to the everyday lives of medieval people, we're bringing history to life, one story at a time. Thank you for watching. And until our next historical adventure, remember that even the greatest changes often begin with the smallest steps.